This is one of South Korea's most painful and enduring mysteries, a case so haunting that it's often grouped with two other infamous Korean crimes as the country's great unsolved trilogy. It begins with 5 little boys, a spring morning, and a simple childhood errand, going up a hill to look for salamander eggs. None of them ever came home, and for more than 11 years, no one knew what had happened to them, until the mountain finally gave up its secret. This is the story of the Frog Boys, and I'll tell it with the care it deserves, because at the center of it are 5 children who were loved and lost. Let me start with the name, because it's actually a small window into how chaotic and heartbreaking this case was from the very beginning. The boys are remembered as the Frog Boys, but that name is based on a mistake. When they set out that day, they were going to look for salamander eggs. Somewhere in the early reporting, that got garbled into frog eggs, and then frog hunting, and the nickname Frog Boys stuck and never left. So even the name by which the whole country knows these children is, in a sense, a misremembering, a tiny example of how, right from the start, the facts of this case slipped through people's fingers. It was March 26, 1991. The place was the Dalseo District of Daegu, a major city in southeastern South Korea. And there was a particular significance to the date, which is part of why so many kids were out and about. It was a local election day, which meant a school holiday. So on that free morning, 5 boys from the neighborhood set off together toward a nearby hill, Mount Waryong, to look for salamander eggs, the kind of small adventure that's the whole point of being a kid on a day off. The 5 were Cheol-won, the oldest at around 13, Ho-yeon, 12, Kim Jong-gyu, 11, Park Chan-in, 10, and Kim Jong-sik, the youngest, around 9. 5 ordinary boys, ranging from grade schoolers to a young teenager, heading up a hill on a spring holiday. And then they simply vanished. When the boys didn't come home, their families grew frantic and reported them missing. And what followed was one of the largest search efforts in South Korean history. This wasn't a quiet local case. 5 children disappearing all at once gripped the entire nation. The government threw staggering resources at it. Over the course of the search, an enormous number of police and military personnel, cumulatively hundreds of thousands of people over time, were mobilized to look for the boys. Their faces were printed on snack wrappers and milk cartons across the country. Psychics were consulted. Mount Waryong itself, the very hill they'd gone to, was searched. The whole of South Korea was looking for these 5 children, and they found nothing, not a trace. It was as if the boys had walked up that hill and stepped off the edge of the world. For 11.5 years, that's where it stood. The families lived in that unique agony of not knowing, unable to grieve, unable to hope, suspended. Theories swirled. Some wondered if the boys had gotten lost or had an accident on the mountain. But the mountain had been searched repeatedly and turned up nothing, which made an ordinary accident hard to believe. The case became a national wound that wouldn't close. And then, on September 26, 2002, more than 11 years after the boys disappeared, the answer came. On Mount Waryong, the very hill that had been searched again and again, the remains of the 5 boys were discovered. They had been there, on that mountain, the entire time. The discovery transformed the case overnight. This was no longer a missing persons mystery, a story of children who'd wandered off. The official name of the case was changed to reflect the grim truth. It became known as a murder and secret burial case. The boys had not been lost. They had been killed and their bodies concealed on the mountain. And here's where the case becomes both more certain and more agonizing, because the discovery of the remains proved that the children had met a violent end. Examination of the remains indicated injuries consistent with the boys having been killed, not having died by accident or exposure. So now everyone knew with terrible clarity that someone had murdered 5 children on that hillside in 1991. But knowing that it was murder did not bring investigators any closer to who did it. After 11 years, the trail wasn't just cold, it was practically non-existent. There was no clear suspect, no confession, no physical evidence pointing anywhere. The mountain had answered the question of what happened to the Frog Boys, but it refused to say who. And then time ran out in the cruelest possible way. Under South Korean law at that time, murder carried a statute of limitations, a legal deadline after which no one could be prosecuted for the crime. And because the boys had disappeared in 1991 and the bodies weren't found until 2002, that clock had been ticking the entire time the families were searching. The statute of limitations on the case expired in 2006, which means that even if the killer were identified tomorrow, even if someone walked into a police station and confessed in full detail, they could not be charged. The window for justice didn't just close slowly, it slammed shut while the families were still trying to find out what had happened to their own children. South Korea has since reformed these laws, partly in response to cases exactly like this one, abolishing the statute of limitations for murder. But that reform came too late for the Frog Boys. So this case sits in the most painful category imaginable. Confirmed murder, no suspect, and no possibility of prosecution, even if one were ever found. The families spent over a decade searching a mountain that held their sons the whole time, and then learned their boys had been murdered, and then learned that the law would never allow anyone to be punished for it. It's hard to imagine a more complete denial of justice. What I keep coming back to with this case is the smallness and the innocence of how it started. 5 boys, on a day off from school, going up a neighborhood hill to look for salamander eggs in the spring. It's the most ordinary, wholesome thing in the world, exactly the kind of small adventure that childhood is made of. And it ended in something so dark that an entire nation has never gotten over it. The Frog Boys have become, in Korea, a kind of permanent symbol of the cases that the system fails. The children who were searched for by hundreds of thousands of people and still never got justice. We can't give them that justice. The law saw to that. But we can refuse to let them be just a creepy nickname based on a misprint. Their names were Woo Cheol-won, Jo Ho-yeon, Kim Yeong-gyu, Park Chan-in, and Kim Jong-sik. 5 boys who went looking for salamander eggs on a spring morning in 1991 and deserved to come home. Whoever took them from their families has never answered for it, and now never will. The least we can do is remember that they were real and that they mattered. Thank you for sitting with me here in the quiet dark. If this story stayed with you, leave a like so more people remember them, subscribe, and I'll see you for the next one.